Thank you. It's great to be here. And thank you. I was just joking. Thanks to your insightful speech, I had to change all my scripts. So I've got everything ready, but not now.
Well,
So I have to change.
like on the board.
Yeah, exactly.
You always have
So-
to be ready.
I don't think you have to simulate, but that's okay. That's okay. Well, thank you again, just joking apart. Now, if I may step back a bit from the topic, because listening to you, what I got was your move into the boardroom was rather evolutionary.
Yeah.
So it was not like a step to the other, it was not like a graduation, it was more like an evolutionary change.
Yes, it was.
Whereas some of the participants here are looking for their first seat in the board, and in this jurisdiction, it's slightly a different thing. You made very pragmatic suggestions, like the Ritz ladies and a few other things, which are great. But if I may ask you, thinking about the first seat in the board, was there anything you did different to really get that seat, or any specific additional suggestions on top of what you shared with us?
The first board I joined was in hospital. And I had been approached by a friend of my father who had met me. I don't remember where, but he had asked me at the cocktail time, would I be interested in joining the hospital board? You've got to consider, I don't know how it is in this country, but not-for-profit is not always looked at as a good position. In my country, to join non-for-profit is easier. And that's really where we do our class. And often women will refuse if we're asked to do some money gathering. Women don't like to do that in my country. I don't know about here, but I say it's where we can make a difference. Because we have a different network and we've got to learn to be answered no. It doesn't matter. It's to knock on doors, and many men will get the no answer as well. There's no shame in that. And what did I observe then? I can say that I had no knowledge at all of the hospital world, of medicine, of science. So frankly, it was a stage where I was listening a lot. A friend of my father was the chair of the board, and I watched him. And that's something we learn as an executive. You have been through a lot of board directors. You've seen first who reads the material, who knows when they're talking the business you're in, the ignorance who are trying just to kind of send the same message over and over again. So you learn from watching others and observing. So that's my first souvenir.
Thank you. I will ask the same question to Yeşim, because as far as I know, your move to the boardroom was slightly different than what Françoise is sharing with us. Could you maybe tell us how your first seat came?
Sure. So happy to be speaking here all together. So my first seat, when I was in executive roles for nearly 30 years, of course I did have some executive board roles. And like you, Françoise, I did also do a lot of observing in one of my boards that I was attending, not as a board member, but as a finance manager. I was like doing some presentations and everything. I observed the board dynamics, what was going on, and that was a big asset. Later on my transition, after I decided to make the move from executive career to the board career, I did a lot of homework. So I did a lot of research as what are my assets? How can I map my assets with what I can offer in terms of my skill set, my knowledge set, my experience set? So what am I good for in the board? I did some homework on the stock exchange. So I gathered kind of like some public companies who were for independent board roles I looked at. I gathered a number of opportunities where I could be a good member. Then I started looking for networks. Like you mentioned, introductions, they are very precious because when you're applying for a first board role, people will tell you you don't have any board experience. So they will automatically kind of say, okay, now I need somebody with experience. I got declined a couple of times because I didn't have experience. Now, for that reason, I refer to my network and I ask for an introduction to one of the companies in Turkey who is a holding company in the fast-moving goods. And that introduction got me 3 seats, not 1. So that was my first thing. I aimed for 1, I got 3 under the same umbrella, but one was a food company, the other one was a sales and distribution company, the other was another food company under the same holding company umbrella. So that is good.
It's good investment, 3 in 1, huh?
Exactly.
Now, what you are telling us is actually, I took a note of one of your quotes, Françoise. You said, be aware of the forces around you, which was very precious. I think that kind of explains what Yeşim was saying about her capabilities, the opportunities, and the awareness.
Absolutely.
Now, I'll switch gears to another subject, which you did say, I'm not a doctor, and you cannot be a doctor. I'm not an actor, you cannot be an actor. I'm not a singer, you cannot be a singer. Now, my litmus test, we are in one of the vibrant regions of Istanbul. If we go out to Istiklal Avenue, which is 2 blocks on the side, and stop 100 people and ask them, would you sing at the opera? None would say yes. But if you ask them, would you be the CEO of the opera?
Yes.
They would all volunteer.
If he's a man. If she's a woman, no.
Okay. Let's be genderless for the moment. Okay. I agree. Now, the question is, in the board, you often have quite a few CEOs who believe they know everything. And they've done this before. And that transition starts there. So you don't know how a doctor works, but you're the CEO of something, and if you're at the board of a hospital chain, then you start saying, oh, in my time as CEO, I did this. How do you cope with that?
Well, that's where I find that the role of the chair is so important. You don't come to a board the first meeting. You've got to have some introduction, boarding orientation days, not one single 2 hours. You've got to meet the executives, you've got to go on the ground. You know, when I was in Villarreal, I didn't know a thing about trains and the maintenance center and the stations. I have been on the train myself, but that's about it. When I came to, I chair Québécois, which is a big undertaking in broadcasting and telecom as well in the corporate world. I knew that world. That was easier, but so many other times. In mining, what did I know about? Well, gold mining, though, so I knew a bit about gold jewelry, that's all. So you've got to be humble and modest. Yes, you know who you are. You're strong. You wouldn't be there were you not. But that's why I see the boarding days, but the chair role. It kind of explained the culture. Each organization has its own culture. And you cannot sit down coming from the mining industry into, for example, the broadcasting world and say the same thing. Business is business, and no. The listening part is very important. If you want to have influence on the decision-making process, and we all do, we don't go there just to be an observant. We want to play a role. We want to contribute. We want to make a difference. It starts by listening.
Yeşim, I'll come back to you with the same question, but give me just a sec, if I may follow up with what you said, the last part. While you know you don't know everything, I think one of the most important competencies of an efficient board member should be independent thinking and independent speech. Therefore, you should not be stopping yourself in expressing some of the things that come to you. So there's a fine balance there.
Again, the role of the chair. My colleagues would always mock me because I would say, let's do a tour de table. Two of the time is before we start the real discussion, I would always start by the person that doesn't speak much. What's your thoughts? You've read the material, you've been with us for so many months or a couple of years. What's your thoughts? And then you start the discussion. But first, a tour de table on very important issues.
We were just chatting with Yeşim before the panel, and the decision to appoint the right chair is actually one of the most important decisions of the board. So I'll come back to the same question actually, because you being the CFO and the CEO of major organizations, and then you go into the board in an industry where you know inside out. So you should have a kind of an unstoppable impulse to comment on everything.
Oh, yes, I had that. Actually, I'll distinguish because I have been on boards where I knew everything, and I've been on boards where I knew very little. And I'll come to the second part as well. Some adjacent industries or some different situations. So on those where I knew a lot. And actually, I went to the board of a competitor. I mean, we used to be competitors as we were in the executive roles. Now I'm sitting on their board, which is also strange feeling. Now, of course, you have the temptation. And because I'm also not very experienced, I want to kind of give them the hint on a management perspective. So I found a way to do that, and that was in the board meetings. Of course, I wouldn't say this is how you should do that, but I tried to filter it in an executive governance capacity. So I learned my way to put my management impulses into oversight. It was difficult. It's like first time you learn to drive, you have to think, now I turn left, I do this, I turn right. So it's not automatic. I guess that's the key thing. When you start doing it, it's not an automatic behavior. You have to learn it, you have to do it with caution. Over time, it becomes more automatic. And how did I deal with my impulses to give value added to the management? I had some offline meetings with them. As I was traveling from, for example, Istanbul to Izmir, where the meeting was, I was meeting them sometimes on the plane, saying, how is it going? What are your struggles? Maybe would you like to think about this? So offline meetings, offline discussions, also to help me understand how they do things differently than I used to do. And I learned a lot. So I'll stop there.
Well, the listening part and the learning part, as you both underline, are very important.
Can I add something on
Absolutely,
this?
please.
It depends also, are the executives the right ones or not? It's easier, I found, to stay, ends out if the team in general, no one is ever perfect except us, of course, but if you have a good team in front of you, it's easier to stay to your role.
And may I add something? One thing I did, I also called some feedback meetings to the chair of the board. And I said, I have some observations. Are you interested to hear and would you like to hear? And in those, again, offline meetings, I did give feedback on management weaknesses, possible, let's say, areas where I think, and that's the board role, obviously.
Absolutely.
So I did have those feedback meetings, which were important.
Very important when I was saying that I would meetings as chair with my members, but I would invite for dinner, but even before the few phone calls, exactly to get that feedback.
Now, just as a side note for your orientation to this geography, there are a handful of non-shareholder chairs of boards in Turkey. Most of the chairs are actually majority shareholders of the companies.
Okay.
And therefore there is no selection really. So I own the company, so that's my seat type of a situation. That complicates the picture a bit because usually chairs do not invite and cook for the board members. That's not something that we see often here. And some of the chairs, unfortunately, don't know what good looks like. Therefore, they're instinctive in what they are doing. And that kind of, I'll come back to the question, that kind of brings us to the situation where often boards, if I may say, are pulled into executive committees rather than function as a strategic body. Therefore, there's also another impulsive thing for all the executives at the board to play with the pace of the chair. May I? Is that a good way?
Well, it's definitely right what you said in terms of shareholders. Majority of the boards having shareholders as the chair, and I've been in both situations where both a professional chair was there as an independent board member, and also where a family member was the chair. Now, in the situation where the family member is the chair, actually we had an interesting situation because there were two family members and they were rotating the chair role over time, let's say 3 years and then the other, which has its pluses and minuses. But the role of the independent board member, I think, is very critical. Even though they are family members and they're not maybe elected, they do have a respect, most of them, for the independent person. And as an independent, I was able to say, no, we're doing too much backward looking, we need to do more forward looking, we're going too much into executive discussion, we have to do more strategy. So I did get my voice heard, although it was difficult. You need, I think, for independent board members playing a big role. It's a difficult transition, but I think there's a role to play.
I've had that experience myself in two situations. In the mining company, I wasn't chair. The majority shareholder was the chair. So we had the independent member, how do you call that in English? The independent, the lead director.
The lead
Independent director.
doesn't exist here.
But they were like that, as you can imagine. So in fact, the majority shareholder was running the show. And it's difficult. I was chair of the governance committee and the sustainability committee. And frankly, there was a change of CEO during my tenure. With one CEO, it was going very well and I could talk to him because I had a hard time being heard by the shareholder. So at the end, I reached 72 years old and I had to leave. I lost the money and the interest for mining, but I think it was a difficult situation. I had a hard time with the other CEO to really get across with the message. And we were doing acquisitions. But on another undertaking, the broadcasting and telecom, I started as a member and I became the chair. And yet the majority shareholder was sitting on the board. He, for a time, was the CEO, then appointed another one. And frankly, as chair, to talk to the majority shareholder, I had found a way. My mother, when I was young, used to say, I was always impatient, and I would tell her, have you asked father about this? Because they had to agree that there was that kind of couple, the one we like. And my mother would say, not the time. So I learned that there's a time. So with the CEO or the majority shareholder, I would choose my time. And I would come and sit down and I've been thinking, would you like to think about that? Maybe, I would just kind of mumble and say, I've been thinking, I've been reading, and that's interesting, don't you think? And I've thought about that this weekend. And sometimes he would make the position is at the next meeting. Sometimes he pushed it away, but at least I felt I was doing my job in trying to make the contribution or the difference. But majority shareholder is a majority shareholder.
The way just an observation, the way you describe it beautifully, it's also through probing, not making a statement.
Yeah.
So did you think about this? Yeah. Did he consider it this way?
Exactly.
So that also works. Sorry.
I'd like to add a perspective to complement that. I was in a hospital board actually in Bulgaria where I was appointed by the IFC as a nominee director. IFC being a minority shareholder but an impactful shareholder. Although I was independent. I'm standing there for IFC but acting in the interest of the company, of course. Now, we had that conflict with the chairperson where they were having their agenda and they didn't want to have long board meetings, long discussions. So I once went to him in his office and said, I really want to add value. But that was my message. But as you said, there's a time. When I visited him, 90% of the time we talked something totally different. Sports, sailing, this and that. And only in the last 10% I said, I really want to add value. How can I do that more effectively? Because discussions are short, we don't have time, you're pressed for time. And he said, why don't you do this? Add a point to the agenda, do this. And from then on, he was very open to my suggestions, discussions. And that was a turning point. My visit, in which only 10% of the time I made the message, and we just connected, I guess, better. Yeah, so just like I reminded me of that.
Best practice.
Yeah.
Going back to something you said during the speech a couple of times, please correct me if I'm wrong, but again, in this geography, like 2 days of board sessions is not common. It's usually a couple of hours or half a day. And therefore, you really have to go through the material, those big decks, thousands of slides, and then discuss it in that 2-3 hours, or just vote. Never voting happens. That's a different story. But the question or the point that I would like to get from you, when I'm kind of advising clients on this topic, as well as existing or to-be directors, I also tell them that often most decisions at the board are made before the meeting or after the meeting, not during the meeting. How would you say?
Well, that would be very much like when I was heading the Chambers of Commerce in Quebec. All the decisions had been kind of cleared, but that was not for profit, and I was trying to make it very efficient and little on the time of my directors. But no, I wouldn't say that. For me, in my experience, is of course, the material is very conducive to direction. But where it's not, it's often on the strategic plan exercise, where there's more space to the foresight and really the responsibility of the director is to make sure that you have enlarged the vision that is proposed to you, that you've done extra work than just read the material. That all along you have a press reading yourself of other publications to make sure you fuel ideas that are not the ones that will be taken, but force the outside of the box. Otherwise, when you say before the meeting and after the meeting, we're in the box. And Professor Beatty will talk about AI this afternoon. How can you include new thoughts and make sure that you're with it and that you're not things of the past, that you're not in the rear view mirror? Sometimes it's with a mockery, sometimes it's with a study that you've had, but you have to bring the challenge in a way that is not adversary, but rather in a tone that is really wanting to help. And you may be wrong. You may say that. I may be wrong, but I've read that. I wonder if it has some connection with what we're doing. You've got to challenge the decisions, on important issues. Not every item on the agenda is really crucial.
Maybe to correct myself, my comment was more about it is very hard to make calls in those 2-3 hours. You have to prepare the environment.
Yeah.
And then after the meeting, you have to do the final refinements to make the decision more solid. So I'm not saying that there is no discussion at the board, but what I'm trying to say as your example, you have to have separate meetings, sometimes informal meetings.
It's
with
the same
fellow
in our,
direct- Exactly.
It's the same in our jurisdiction. You can, even if you are 2 days, 2 days will be a day of committees and a day of the board. But you've got to prepare.
Exactly.
And it's very important. We all learned the importance of the role or the relationship between the CEO and the chair. The CEO has to work with his executives and the chair has to work with his colleagues. It's not something that spontaneous generation.
it needs to be prepared, of course. There's no other way than communication.
Yeşim, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I agree that there's a lot of preparation, and I think most of the work is done before the meeting. And the committees, I believe, are very important. I mean, again, whenever I had some challenges raising a critical or discussion of a critical topic in a board setting, I made sure that I was in the committee. I mean, I was appointed to a lot of committees, but some of them I wasn't, and I still sat in the committees by asking permission or whatever. And that allowed me to make some key points, and then they invited me to the committees again. So sometimes you need to even impose yourself if you find that critical. So there's a lot of preparation beforehand.
What do you mean by imposing yourself?
For example, there was one committee, HR committee, where I was not part of, but there was an important topic going on in the hospital board, and I said, we're not finding enough time to discuss it in the board, and I know this is on your agenda. Is it okay that I join the discussion? I volunteered to be part of that discussion, and slowly, seeing that I was adding a value to that discussion, they said, please become a member, because you're adding value. So sometimes you really need to go out of the norms and say, okay, I have something to add here, and then that's where you can
And
make a
HR
difference.
is a very good example.
Yeah.
You're right, committees are absolutely important. As chair also, I was having a governance committee made of all the chairs of the committee. So that was like a preparation that could really be helpful. But HR issue is something that is not really discussed at board level. I remember in my days of first experience in corporate world that the HR person would come only when we were discussing the bonus. But the HR, the culture, hiring, the reputation we had, the satisfaction level, and that I've seen a change over the years. Now the HR person more often will be present to the board discussion, as was the CFO all along. And that is a change, I think, of the sensitivity of executives, but also of board directors.
And if I may add another example of a committee, maybe this could be of inspiration to others. So I'm in the board of a bank. I'm an independent bank board member, and banks are very regulated. I was on the governance committee for 2 years. Then I was appointed to the audit committee, which is a totally different work. And because of that, the chair asked me to focus on the audit committee and not be part of the governance. I have a heart for governance matters, so I still stayed out of the committee, but still close enough, asking how is it going, this and that. Probably seeing my interest in governance, this year I'm appointed back into the governance committee as the chair this time. So I not only got the committee back, I got the chair position back. So sometimes, again, I'm doing a lot of imposing examples, but showing your interest and impact can be important.
But doing the work, that's what it means. Yeah.
In consideration of time, I have one last topic I would like to discuss with you. And as a leadership advisory firm, we believe there are 4 leadership competencies that board members should have. We kind of simplify by saying results orientation, strategic thinking, influencing collaboratively, and independent thinking and expression. These 4 and any board member should have. Having said that, actually these competencies are also used and developed at executive roles in different ways. Whereas at the board level, it's more through people you have to make impact, not you doing the job with the CEO, but making the CEO do the job and achieve. 2 things happen, not always, but in my different observations. One is upwards delegation by the executives. So sending lots of things to the board, not needed to be discussed at the board level. And the second one is pulling the board into execution by, let's go to that client with you. Why don't you join that budget committee? Why don't you come with us to this union negotiation because you're part of the HR committee? I'm just making it up. So what I'm trying to say, if the executives, not just by dumping reports, but pull or push the board in different ways, how do you cope with that?
I haven't seen that much in the corporate world, in my experience. I've seen it a lot in the non-for-profit. And that's where it's hard not to become, pretend you're a singer or an actor or a doctor. Somehow it's easier to cross the border. So you gotta sit down with the CEO the same way and say, what's missing around here? To strengthen the team, to recognize that there's a lack. It's not the fault of anyone, it's a matter of not enough heads. Sometimes
Assuming it's capacity but not attitude.
Exactly. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Sometimes it's by a consultant that you add to the team, but to advise the CEO in strengthening, but to recognize that there's a need. It's not by pushing it away and really reinforcing, because the directors might have time on their hands and they might like to get involved. But it's really not ideal, to say the least.
Okay. Your excuses?
Oh yeah, the way I cope with that is allocating a certain time to those, let's say, a representation, going to the branches, going to maybe together, because sometimes they do want to have an important opening together with the board members, that's okay. But as long as it's a portion of my commitment and I keep my focus on the main board commitments separately. And again, I agree, it's about smelling and understanding what's missing, what's going on. Where can I provide a helicopter view if that's needed? With the board still had capacity, but I provided certain direction which helps them think. Again, let's remember our roles is also to not just vote, but to ask the right questions, so to put them into the right thinking, to provide the right governance thinking going forward. So we have to think governance, but we have to also understand that there are certain things where our help might be needed, but we allocate the right time to that, but not to be pulled into it. So we're still in control, I would say.
Thank you. So, as a closing remark, actually two things in one question. One is simple, very pragmatic advice for people who want to take their first board seat. Anything they could do to strengthen their campaign. That's the first thing. And the second question, you said lots of beautiful things, but if it was just one thing, what would you advise them to work on to make this transition smooth and efficient?
Well, in order to promote yourself, given that you have the competencies and you've done the expert work, is the networking. You cannot be found, even if you're the most beautiful flower in the garden, if you don't come out and no one knows you. That's for sure. And that's something in woman's life, it's very demanding to keep the network alive. There are so many good excuses, but to find time. Secondly, as I've said, the transition for me is not that strict and short. It's a prolongation of the same competencies. You cannot be capable of a discussion around the table if you have not been that way as an executive. So cultivate the capacity of, yes, implementing what your operation responsibilities are, but beware of your colleagues, beware of a global vision, and contribute to that as an executive, because that's what will help you do the quantum leap that is required to become a director. And you'll keep working hard. It's not a job, some think it's a retirement job. It's not. I'm now a retiree, but until last winter, I was not, because you're always on the qui-vive. You're always ready to be called upon to learn, to think about it, and what will be your next
contribution.
A bonus question, and I'll come back to you. The bonus question is, you mentioned AI. In the age of AI, in the past, what we observed, often companies were looking for board members who were specialized in one thing, an expert. Whereas now in AI, the 10,000 hours rule does not work anymore. So are we going into an age where we will be looking for board members for their full wisdom rather than their specialist know-how in one thing?
I think there'll be a mix. Some will say, bring younger people into the board because they are more inclined to be open and curious about AI. We won't become the champion of that. Diversity is still important. You know, whether it's diversity in men and women, diversity in competencies, engineer and technology and legal and marketing.
Age.
Yeah, that will remain important to review. Do we have all the kinds? And when we don't, for example, AI, bring in some external advice to the board. We're allowed to do that.
Sure.
And we need to be free to do that in order to really do better work in the changing world.
I'm sure you've seen, I think it was last week, there was a discussion in FT about including bots to boards.
Yeah.
So that's now under discussion. So the same three questions for you.
Okay, so my advice is, it's maybe counterintuitive, is to focus. Don't say that you're doing all these 5 things. Find that one thing that people will come to you for. So find, in communicating your value as a board candidate member, find your key focus area. I worked with some companies who are, helping communicate your value, and that was the key thing. We spent a couple of months on thinking about our about sentence in LinkedIn, which is also on our board CV. So the more you focus, the better it is. Some people can argue, but that doesn't mean you don't keep learning. Like, I'm also all the time learning, adding new certificates, trying to understand technology, this and that. But again, know your domain and try to benchmark against what's the best of that in the world, not just your jurisdiction. So if it's, for example, mine is risk governance, I try to be as good as I can be in that area. The second thing is networking. Definitely build your network. That's so key. I totally agree with Françoise. And to the networking part, let people know what you're seeking and keep building and brushing that network all the time with the new news from yourself, with how you're going on, and it's a lot of work. So this is hard work, but I'm sure all of you are willing to do that hard work. And finally, to the networking piece, you talked about some women clubs, right?
Yeah.
In Brussels, where I also go between Brussels and Istanbul, there's a club only for women, and we gather there. It's called the 9. Men are invited. They can enter only upon invitation. So if you're in Brussels, let me know, and I'd be happy to take some men friends upon invitation.
Thank you.
So thank
for
you.
that. Well, let me then conclude by actually merging the two things, and I'll just add a spice of my part. I think there is sometimes a misunderstanding for female executives seeking their first board seat, and that misunderstanding is around increasing their capabilities will increase the probability of getting a board seat, which in my experience is not the case.
Yeah.
As you both underlined, I think the networking part, managing your brands, making the right stakeholder management makes even more impact for the first board seat. Therefore, I would put networking on the top. But also, again, the shared wisdom says that never stop learning. The learning part comes, but the learning part does not replace networking. I mean, I used to say, like in these nice stories, a prince with a white horse would come and take you to wherever you dream of. It doesn't happen in this,
I'm still
in this
waiting.
world. Yeah. Me too. So, but it doesn't happen in this world. Therefore, you have to make yourself visible as you rightfully described. Regardless of how beautiful of a flower you are, you have to find the right place, increase your visibility so that others will see and pick you up.
Absolutely.
Is that a good summary?
Very good.
Well, then, thank you very much.
Thank you.